Ooh. Yes. Hello, everyone. Hi, I am Shelly Ann Dunkley, founder and director at Live Echo Magazine. We are an online resource and consultancy firm with a focus on climate advocacy, building environmental awareness, and activism across the Caribbean. Thank you for joining us today. This is the beginning of an exciting knowledge sharing week focused on environmental issues throughout our region. Individually, we are relatively small and isolated territories for which climate change and environmental degradation poses an existential threat. However, collectively, we are 15 million people strong. Together, we can have a huge impact in the fight for the health of our environment. Let us take this time to share and learn from each other. Let us discuss issues and solutions for a better Caribbean region. Out of our discussions, we will see that our challenges are not unique and that we are neither isolated nor alone in this endeavor. The Caribbean region will be one of the most impacted by climate change. So we need to continue the conversation as to how to mitigate the fallout and lead the change. Our islands, governments, and people together need to advocate for systemic change, since we stand to lose the most of our natural resources. In this forum, we're pleased to have the youth. The choices we make today will impact their future. During the week, we will hear from youth leaders, experts, issues around climate change and how it will and is impacting our everyday lives. Financing opportunities for entities seeking information on how to become sustainable and the risks associated with not including sustainable business strategies into the core of your business. Urban planning professionals and waste management practitioners. We hope these conversations will help us all understand our personal impact, our collective impact, and agree upon the steps we can take as a people, a nation, a region, and human beings existing on planet Earth. There is no planet B. Let's do better for the generations to follow. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Scotiabank, Coca-Cola, Junk, and Cayman Business Solutions for their bold support of this initiative. And thanks to our partners. Again, thank you all for joining us, and let's jump right in to the inaugural staging of Caribbean Environment Week. All right, Shelly Ann Dunkley here, for those that missed the first part of that. Now, we are going to be joined by Mrs. Eleanor Jones and Vincent Sweeney, who I am hoping can actually start their cameras. Hi, Vincent. You need to unmute.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. Good to have you all.
Yes, yes.
Good morning, good morning,
Hi,
good
Mrs.
morning.
Jones.
Hi. Morning, Vincent.
Good morning, Eleanor.
All right, so we're looking forward to an exciting chat today. And Mrs. Jones, what I'll do is ask you to give us an overview of ESL. And for those that don't know, Caribbean Environment Week is in partnership with Environmental Solutions Limited. So Live Echo teamed up with ESL to host this week of activities. So Mrs. Jones, give us a rundown of what ESL and the work that.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It is my pleasure to share with you what Environmental Solutions is all about, because we really are very proud of the work that we have been doing, not only in Jamaica. We're based in Jamaica, but we work throughout the Caribbean and in fact other parts of the world. It's a pleasure to also partner with Live Echo, and I congratulate you for the initiative. And so we were happy when you approached us to partner, to join, to share information. Environmental Solutions was launched in 1991, and it's significant for us because between 1990 and 1992 there was tremendous energy and planning by the United Nations for the first World Conference on Environment and Development. The Earth Day initiative, which had been started sometime 20 years or 10 years before, I think, was re-energized in 1990. And the conference itself was held, which came to be known as the Rio Conference, was held in 1992. And at that, the theme was harmonizing, well, not harmonizing, but bringing together environment and development, because there had been always this sense that the two were mutually exclusive, and development could not incorporate environment. And so many of the global leaders, and particularly through the United Nations system, said the time had come for us to really focus. And so the term sustainable development emerged at that time. And Environmental Solutions took the decision, a team of professionals who were working in different disciplines of the environment, to come together to form a company that would seek to harmonize development and the environment, and to create solutions instead of pointing fingers and so on. We needed to come to the market with how we could create solutions for sustainable business, for sustainable community. And so we have been doing that for the past almost 30 years. And we've evolved naturally. We have grown both in terms of the numbers of professionals who work with us, the disciplines that we have offered, and in terms of the business areas that we work with. We have two divisions in Environmental Solutions, one that focuses on environmental management systems, and the other on environmental health and analytical services. Now, we have two divisions, but there is synergy between the two, because, of course, environmental sustainable development, let's say, is an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary exercise. And so that is where we are headed. And through environmental management systems, we are focusing more recently on the greening of business, on sustainable business development, because it's not enough for us to talk about how good it is to protect habitats and ecosystems. We have to focus on the people side of sustainable development. And that is what Environmental Solutions is very, very keen on. So we do planning and management systems. And then and disaster risk management, building climate resilience, a lot of emphasis on that more recently, and particularly throughout the Caribbean region. Then the environmental health and analytical services, we recognize the need for bringing data, because we have to have data inform our decisions, and those services incorporate an internationally accredited laboratory, of which we are very proud, because we were the first private sector lab to be internationally accredited, ISO 17025. And we also have now the largest number of parameters that are accredited. We've just recently gone through a re-audit, and we're very pleased. So we work a lot with water chemistry, water quality, air quality, and of course now with the COVID pandemic, we have been working on some of those environmental health issues, which are very important. So that very quickly is what Environmental Solutions is all about. So next, we were launched on Earth Day, I guess I neglected to say, in 1991. So on Earth Day 2021, we will be 30. We will be celebrating our 30th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we're looking to we're lifting the bar and really looking to see how we can expand outward, not only in terms of geographical space, but also in terms of the kinds of services that we bring to sustainable development. So that's Environmental Solutions.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you for that. And I mean, we're very proud of your almost 30 years. So congrats to you and your team, and keep up the great work.
And
Vincent,
I just want to say that I have
love for you to give us
a very fine team. I want to make sure that I big up the team, as we say, because we have a very strong team, very devoted, highly professional team who are committed to the vision and their own professional growth in terms of sustainable development.
Yes, you do have a very good team. We've worked closely together on a few projects, so I'm familiar with the ladies, and
and the gentlemen, please.
Yes, I said gentlemen. Vincent,
very important.
tell us a little bit about the work that you do. I know, you know, United Nations Environment Program, and for me to say little, I think I'm understating what you're actually doing. So tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
Okay, thanks again for this opportunity to be a part of this Caribbean Environment Week. As the head of the sub-regional office for the United Nations Environment Program in the Caribbean, we have a responsibility to ensure that the work that UNEP does globally impacts on the Caribbean region. And we, as an organization, focus on obviously all of the main, let's say, priorities of the global community on environment. And this would include everything from what you would normally expect, like climate change, oceans and coastal zone management, watershed, water resources management, wastewater management, issues like sustainable consumption and production and resource efficiency, which look at issues related to energy, of course, overlapping into waste management. We support response to disasters and conflicts, particularly environmental emergencies. We support environmental information management, and we look at everything related to environmental agreements, multilateral environmental agreements, as well as regional environmental agreements, climate change, biodiversity, desertification, the whole range of global environmental concerns. We try to Caribbeanize those issues and then respond as best as we can on behalf of the people of the Caribbean region. So that's generally what we do. My office has been around for almost 5 years now, actually. I was still thinking 4 years, but it's closer to 5 years. This last year has kind of disappeared on us, as you know. It seems like we put everything on pause since March.
Yeah.
But of course, the organization has been around for close to 50 years. We're supposed to be celebrating our 50th anniversary in 2022. We were established as a result of the Stockholm Conference in 1972. And we are supported, of course, by the Caribbean Environment Program, which is the Cartagena Convention Secretariat, which most of you probably are more familiar with because they've been around and in Jamaica for many years. And of course, we have a regional office for Latin America and the Caribbean based in Panama. So a lot of our support comes from those two offices.
Okay. All right. All right. So let's jump right in. We're going to do a brief run through of what Caribbean Environment Week is and the expectations, you know, from our panelists and even from this discussion, because while this is the first conversation, while this is, you know, an overview of the week, we do have a lot of areas that we can touch on, you know. Caribbean Environment Week, for the most part, we want to look at the challenges, the environmental challenges that we're having, from declining biodiversity, you know, or waste management issues, or improper management of our waste, plastic problem, plastic pollution, you know, the phrases are numerous. Sustainable development, we're not change in how we look at the environment and business. You know, the two need to coexist in the same space. Financing, obviously, which is a huge issue now, especially with the rains that we've been having. You know, I'm following the stories locally and even the devastation been caused. What the other issues you see, Vincent, in the work that you do? What are some of the other issues that you're seeing?
Well, I think you've captured some of the more timely and relevant issues right now. In terms of some of the major concerns right now across the Caribbean region, obviously the frequency and intensity of storms, pollution as a result of those storms and otherwise, impacts on our shorelines, the issue of plastics, and maybe not so much an issue in Jamaica, but certainly in much of the rest of the Caribbean and even the wider Caribbean, is the issue of sargassum, and seaweed that's infesting our shorelines and impacting on fisheries as well as the tourism sector. And then we have, of course, the increasing energy demands, and those energy demands, everything related to cooling of our buildings, demand from manufacturing sector, transportation, of course, both on land, air, and sea. And of course, we've mentioned a number of them already in terms of the areas that we focus attention on. You mentioned biodiversity, the issue of COVID-19 and the origins of COVID-19 are linked very closely to degradation of our biodiversity. And it's not always recognized as not only a health issue, but as an environmental and ecosystem issue. So these would be some of the issues. But I'm hoping that during our discussion today, we focus not only on the problems, but also on the solutions, as well as the many good things that are happening right now. Because
for sure.
Too much doom and gloom, and I don't think we should be doom and gloom. We should be focusing on the future and building on the positive.
Yeah. Mrs. Jones, did we touch on all of the areas that you think? I mean, for the week, these are some of the areas that we're going to be covering, but what are some of the other issues or challenges that you believe the region is experiencing?
Well, first of all, it is a pleasure to be sharing this virtual podium with my colleague Vincent, colleague of many, many years. And he understands, yes, we were just in prep school. He understands the issues of environmental health in the region. And I think now that we're talking about COVID, but environmental health is much wider. And we have to understand that it is also underpinned by so many of the other things that we're talking about. We came through chikungunya, we came through Zika, and we have dengue, which was there and continues to rear its head. These are vector-borne diseases that are very closely related to the changing climate, to the warming, and we have lost considerable productivity. We need to begin to focus a little bit more on the relationship between environmental health in its widest sense and sustainable communities, sustainable business, because we tend to look at that bottom line just in terms of what we put out. Where we need to become more people-centric, I think, in our approach. And certainly as we're focusing on the vulnerability of our island states, all of which are really coastal states, even for the ones on the Central American Peninsula and South America, Belize, and Guyana, they are all coastal states, so they're considered small island developing states. And we need to focus on that vulnerability and really integrating, have risk-informed decision making. We tend to fall short of that, and going forward, I think these are very important issues. And when we look at what these hurricanes Eta and Zeta are doing, especially Eta, as someone said, the path that it has taken pretty much summarizes what 2020 has been about in terms of twisting and turning and uncertainty and striking from many different directions. So nature is telling us that we need to bring nature back front and center in its widest sense. And not just, as people tell, when they hear environment, they think you plant some trees and you protect the bees and you make sure you dispose of the garbage. But what does all of that mean for humanity is where I think we need to be directing our attention in the region. And learning from what is going on elsewhere, because we're really overloaded, if you will, with all the work that's going on, but there are tremendous opportunities for us to learn and to pull from those.
And that's why we're having these conversations, because we're learning from what is happening in our sister islands, and the region, but also globally. There are various regions across the globe that we can also learn from. So we will be having conversations about the issues, the challenges, but definitely offering solutions. That is what the week is for. All right, so we're going to actually do a poll right now. My co-host, Miss Ashley, is here, just in case you see me look away sometimes. Ashley is nudging me to do something. So you should see the poll pop up on your screen. So if you guys take a moment and respond to the poll, see some responses coming in. All right, so pretty much we're asking, you know, how did you hear about Caribbean Environment Week? Because we want to know where people heard about it and, you know, I guess the interest as well. So, all right, so we have a few, most of which are from family, friend, or co-worker. Then there's obviously social media pages, etc. All right, so we'll give it another 10 seconds or so, 5 seconds, and then we'll pull it down. Yes. Please remember, if you have any questions, use the Q&A tab and you can shoot us your questions. If we don't respond in the chat, you know, our co-host here, she will definitely try and respond to you as best as possible. All right, so we're gonna share the results so we can see where people saw. Okay, so most persons, it's actually from your family, friend, co-worker, so that's beautiful. Keep it up, which means that information is being shared between family, friends, co-workers, etc. So keep it up. That is actually one of the better ways that you can get information going and, you know, spread the word. All right, so let us jump right in. All right, so one of the things I wanted to touch on is how is climate change affecting our region? And I mean, we briefly touched on some of it earlier, but let us, I guess, get to the point of it in terms of how is it directly impacting us? Mrs. Jones?
How is climate change directly impacting us? Is that the question?
Say it again. Yeah, the Caribbean society. How is climate change affecting the Caribbean society and our way of living?
Oh, wow, that's a biggie. That is a biggie.
All right, well, stick to a few points.
Okay, let's start with the whole issue of unpredictability of the climate, unpredictability and let's look at unpredictability of rainfall. So there are times when we're having long periods of drought, and then we have massive floods. And agriculture is a mainstay of the region. Most islands have a very significant agricultural sector. And so if we have unpredictable rainfall, that has implications because water is fundamental for the agricultural sector. Let's just pull that out. And then, of course, water for domestic purposes. Tourism is a key sector for all of the territories in one way or the other, less so in some. But again, water is fundamental for that. And then with respect to the tourism sector, we have had a focus on coastal tourism. We are moving now perhaps a little bit more inland. Some territories have always had that, like Dominica, for instance, led with their ecotourism and marketing their mountains and had their specific things. Climate change is bringing extreme events which are affecting our coastal resources and which are also affecting our interior resources. And if we think of Dominica with Hurricane Maria, they were devastated. Their mountains, all that vegetation, everything that they were marketing got devastated. And there are other islands. Puerto Rico also has, good, although they're not part of the English speaking, they're still Caribbean, and we have a lot to learn from them as well. So, and then Jamaica, the same thing, destroying the infrastructure. That is important for us to, go between places. And then storm surge is a major aspect of these extreme hurricanes and storms. And the storm surge is damaging coastal properties, damaging our beaches, and sea level rise is also claiming some of those coastal areas. The warming of the oceans, the higher temperatures affecting our coral reefs, and again, affecting also our marine life. So there are several aspects to it. I think though, that we really need to look at what is it, what's the uncertainty, what's the unpredictability, and how do we put in place adaptation measures to ensure that we minimize losses to our economy. And I come back to the point about risk-informed decision making. I think that's just so very important for all of the topics that you have lined up for the week.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
It's always a challenge to add anything after Eleanor. Eleanor has the floor, but I'll try to add a couple of things. I think we need to recognize that urban areas across the region are growing very quickly, and these are often built in areas at risk of natural disasters, as has been mentioned, and ecosystems are struggling to support the local population. As Elena would have mentioned, these communities are experiencing reduced water supply and poor sanitation, which present health, environmental health, as well as economic implications. And this is only expected to worsen as climate change accelerates. We know that the Caribbean contributes a very small amount of global CO2 emissions, less than 1%, but we are subject to disproportionate consequences of warming temperatures and sea level rise in the form of, as was mentioned, tropical storms and hurricanes. And this climate change, which is caused by CO2 emissions, has affected everything from severe weather, as has been mentioned, hurricanes, floods, and droughts. We don't always think of droughts when we think of climate change. We tend to think of hurricanes. And of course, our preparations for these events, as already been mentioned, agriculture, water availability, vector control, which was alluded to earlier when we spoke about the dengue and chikungunya and Zika. But even issues like migration, climate refugees, we tend not to think of climate refugees, but if we think of, for example, what happened in Barbuda, what's been happening in the Bahamas as a result of recent hurricanes. Since the elections in the US are quite topical, the Trump administration had denied the designation of temporary protected status to an estimated 70,000 Bahamians who were left homeless after Hurricane Dorian decimated Bahamas and Abaco. So, there are issues which we tend not to think about when we talk about climate change, which are impacting on our community in the Caribbean and our wider society.
Okay. As it relates to, these chat that we're having, do you think it resonates with people that, our climate is changing, or climate change, just call a phrase, and these things are happening because of climate change and because of our way of living? Do you think that people are actually understanding that what we're doing impacts the environment and then impacts us? Vincent, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we in the Caribbean, we acknowledge that the climate change is manifesting itself. I don't know that we are necessarily convinced that we can do a lot about it. We can adapt, but the mitigation side of it, doing things to stop the climate from changing, I think we tend to feel more helpless, and certainly the average person in the community probably does not see that they can do a whole lot on their own. But what I counter with is that notwithstanding the fact that we are small and our impact is limited, we have a global voice, and therefore, the things we do, even in our own small way, can have very significant political influence, which can then promote a broader global action. I mean, we've moved away from, for example, renewables. We've moved, towards renewables and alternative energies. Even in Jamaica, for example, the solar and wind. We've moved towards improving energy efficiency. The University of the West Indies has its net zero energy building. Jamaica is moving towards a national cooling strategy. The rest of the other parts of the Caribbean are looking at improving efficiency in street lighting. We're even moving towards electric vehicles, electric mobility, and cleaner and more efficient vehicles. So there are a lot of things happening which we are doing, which will help us from an economic point of view. but will also send a very strong message to the international community that these small islands are doing things. So what's your excuse? And I think that is perhaps where we need to be pushing the fact that even though we're not large contributors, we are doing our part.
Okay. Yeah. Mrs. Jones, do you think people are connecting the dots? And I guess just to add to what Vincent is saying in terms of,
I just want to
are we
endorse
actually connecting it?
I want to endorse what Vincent has said with respect to the voice, because the Caribbean bloc is a very strong bloc, especially in the United Nations and on the global agenda. And so I want to endorse that yes, and you hear people saying, oh, we're not contributing very much, but some of the studies show that per capita, we contribute maybe more than we should be. So the whole business of reducing our carbon footprint is very important, in addition to which we have signed on to this global agreement. And so we have an obligation to do that. We are making significant strides, I think, with respect, as Vincent has indicated, with respect to energy, renewable energy and reducing our energy consumption and so on. Happily, this is happening. I suggest, I think that perhaps it really has been triggered more by what the bottom line considerations are than by reducing carbon emissions. However, it's important that we think not so much of the means to the end, but if this is reducing emissions, that's what we want, and it is the best of both worlds, because we also want the bottom line significance, and this is one way of demonstrating that good environmental practice is good for business. So so that is very important. And then we're not really connecting the dots. There are lots of efforts to do this, and this Caribbean Environment Week is one such. And we have to just keep chipping away, and very importantly, bringing the message to people at a place where they understand it. We have to begin with people where they are. What is in it for me is really the key route that we need to take, because if we just come and talk about climate change, first of all, I think it's something in the future, or that's so far away, it has nothing to do with me. But you talk about water supply, you talk about the importance of sanitation, you talk about the dengue mosquito, you talk about heat, and COVID, and what the connection is. We have to bring it to where people are. And I personally think, and I've always advocated, that environmental health is a great hook, because even for sanitation, when your children are having gastroenteritis and all of these things, if you can link it to that, then people will begin to understand. That's what I have to.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, it's making it connecting the dots, like I was saying, in terms of making it, they're relevant to them. So if we're talking about marine pollution, you talk to the fisherman and you're just like, okay, well, this is what's going to happen, and the fish will eat the plastic, etc., etc. But I mean, when we now look at what is happening further upstream, the dots are not being connected. So it's how can we even connect those dots from those that aren't necessarily directly impacted by, whether it is financial or, maybe they don't eat fish or whatever the case is, but it's for us to really try and connect those dots so people understand that a healthy environment means healthy people, healthy business, etc. All right, so as it relates to, the fact that we depend so heavily on our natural resources, and that helps obviously to drive our economies. Our current practices as it relates to government and private sector, do we see that as sustainable? Mrs. Jones, let's talk about that.
You mentioned
business a while ago.
No.
As well.
What we are doing is not sustainable. It's not sustainable.
Okay.
We talk sustainability. We talk sustainable development goals. We talk all the things that we want to achieve, but regrettably, some of our actions do not reflect that. Yeah. And it's very worrying because, as I said, we're not, again, coming back, and I'm going to repeat this many times, coming back to taking consideration of the risk. what do we stand to lose? So we decide, okay, let's take development because we have planning on the agenda. Are we looking really at all of the pros and the cons of what we're doing? Do we have a big picture view, or do we just simply look at, okay, in this area we want to let's take a hot topic right now in Jamaica, which is very disturbing, quarrying an area that ought to be protected, and quarrying an area that it has the potential for tourism enhancement. It's an area that it has a big sign nearby saying here is a beauty spot. There's no beauty spot in a quarry. And then you have also, you know, habitats. Are we serious? If we are serious, we really need to take all of these issues into consideration and not simply say, well, we need jobs and therefore we are going to go ahead and approve this and that. So what we're doing is not sustainable. And regrettably, if we don't bring this risk up front, we always come back to pay a heavy price. We look at what's going on with our road infrastructure, and we've spent a lot of money upgrading roads. Regrettably, again, the planning has not taken into consideration the fact that you now have high intensity, short duration, unpredictable rainfall that is going to cause flooding. How are we coping with that? Mm-hmm. So it's integrated planning. It is inclusiveness, because you mentioned about the fisher folk and so on. People who use the environment, the average person who uses the environment understands it, and they know, you know, what it is, what it means to them. So we can build on that, learn from them. We often think that we can simply declare or dictate, but there's so much that we can learn. And if you're really doing effective integrated planning, you have to include the persons that you are supposedly trying to help. Because when we talk about jobs, the jobs are not sustainable if you're going to ruin the basis on which, and Jamaica is a natural resource-based economy. And we need to integrate the pieces and have a strategic approach to how we manage and how we minimize risk and minimize loss. You have to have trade-offs, obviously, but where is the cost and the benefit? Are we looking at that? And I think that is true for the entire Caribbean.
Yeah. And is that let's say, private sector, they are not connecting the dots again in terms of the need for natural resources to manufacture, the need for natural resources in order to, you know, function as a business? Are they not connecting the dots to say, well, if you deplete the environment, then, you know, there'll be nothing left? You know,
well, that's true. That's true. But remember, private sector is big, wide, and in the Caribbean, most of the members of the private sector are small and medium entrepreneurs. They're not the big people. We tend to zero in on the big people. The big people are important, but we also have to reach the small and medium entrepreneurs, and so that they can understand. And I think that if we use the approach of what's in it for me, what will make my business fail, what will make it sustainable, why should I do this? You're not going to get everybody, obviously, but you will begin to, and there are some large companies that are integrating some of the sustainable development goals into their strategic planning. It really is a pleasure to see and to hear about those. And maybe we need to tell more of those success stories, and also work also with all different groups.
Yeah. Any insight, Vincent?
Well, since Eleanor says one thing, I would probably say the opposite, because I don't want to repeat what she said. I would say yes and no to your initial question about whether the practices are sustainable. So I agree with her, but I also want to emphasize some things which are in fact positive. Of course, the tourism sector is, when you think of the private sector, it might be one of the areas that we in the Caribbean would focus on. It must be profitable. But in fact, the tourism sector is doing quite a lot. And they are looking at issues from energy conservation, which obviously is related to the bottom line, but they do have positive impacts. They're looking at water consumption. They're looking at improved waste management. And one thing which is probably very notable is the fact that that a lot of the tourism players are moving in the same direction that governments are moving in terms of reducing the use of single-use plastic items or single-use items, including straws, stirrers, cups and plates and cutlery and all of those things. But also in the government sector, I think we should in terms of giving credit where credit is due, note that there are a lot of efforts with respect to water management in the water sector to improve efficiency, sharing lessons learned, building capacity, reducing leakages of non-revenue water. I mean, I was part of a high-level forum of Caribbean ministers responsible for water management and also waste management over the last couple of weeks. And there's a lot of sharing of good practices. There's a lot of cooperation, even during disasters, after disasters. There's climate proofing that's taking place in government buildings. In the case of Jamaica, the NHT, as part of the same net zero energy building project, has improved their cooling systems, and government of Antigua and Barbuda is building resilience to hurricanes in essential services. Bahamas is looking at the countrywide grid stability. Grenada is looking at improving efficiency in street lighting. Countries are looking at waste management and looking at other approaches such as waste to energy in St. Lucia, Martinique, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica. Recycling is improving in parts of the region, including the OECS. Cooling strategies are being implemented in government. So there's a lot that's happening at the governmental level, and I don't want it to appear as if nothing is happening, because there is lots happening, but of course there is a lot more that needs to be done.
I support.
I do believe it really just needs to get to the everyday man in terms of how these things will affect them and are affecting us currently. But I mean, as Vincent said, there is a lot happening. We've seen a lot of innovation actually in this space, whether it is financial entities that are actually offering solutions, whether it's renewable solutions, loans for businesses that have sustainable strategies involved in them. So there's a lot actually happening in this space. But I mean, we do need to let persons know what is happening and the good and the bad of it all. So let's see if we can take a question. Actually, do we have anything in the Q&A? All right, so we do have one from Emma. I believe we kind of touched on it a bit. How do you think the private sector can get more engaged and focused on sustainability and green? They don't seem to have got it yet. Vincent, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, Vincent will take that one.
I think once they can see the benefits, they will get on board. Yeah. And there's the issue of corporate responsibility, but there's also the issue of shareholder responsibility. So basically, if you can increase the demand, the return for your shareholders, as well as raise the profile as a corporate, in terms of corporate responsible corporate entity, it's a win-win. And I think the tourism sector is a very good example. Manufacturing maybe a little bit less so, but there's a lot going on in the tourism sector, and they rely on goodwill as well as the international and national reputation. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and we've been doing quite a bit of work with the tourism sector in some of the areas that I've already mentioned. Of course, sustainable consumption and production relates to a number of sectors, and we could talk about incentives that the government could consider in terms of making green products and green manufacturing more attractive or favorable in terms of import duties and things like that. So I think there is a lot that can be done, and it probably requires a bit more partnership with the government as well in that regard.
Yeah. Anything to add, Mrs. Jones?
Just to endorse the point that partnership and shareholder accountability, because the bottom line is very important. That's why people are in business, not in business for the fun of it, and so the win-win is critical, and the win-win is possible. And so I would say many of us who are trying to promote this ought to look at ways, and I agree with Vincent, there's a lot happening. And as I said, there's some companies integrating this already. They were leading the way with disasters and in disaster risk management, and some leading the way with government. But you need the partnership between government and the private sector, and recognizing that as we're talking about the business sector, we're talking about a wide, diverse sector, and it can't be one size fits all. But corporate social responsibility, yes, but shareholder responsibility, bottom line responsibility is key, and that is what is going to make the difference. And in the case of the tourism sector, one of the things about it in the early days when they first started to bring it, it was all about what their international business was demanding. There were some tour operators that were not coming if you could not demonstrate that you had environmentally sound practices in your operations. And that has really taken off to the point where they see the link between good environmental practice and good bottom line business. So it's a good, really good. Vincent has emphasized it, and I think it's something that we really need to look at. What can we learn from that to maybe multiply in other areas?
I'd like to just add one point on that before we move on to the next question. Celia. I was in a meeting last week, and a representative from the Caribbean Tourism Organization made a presentation. And one of the most remarkable points that she raised in her presentation was that in surveys done on guests that were visiting Barbados, the majority of the decision making in terms of whether they would return to Barbados was based on the number of pieces of garbage that they saw on the beach. So that influences their decision to return more than perhaps anything else of their experience on the island. Not the hotel, not the flight, not the customs in the airport, not the drinks or the entertainment, but the garbage, the number of pieces of garbage that they see on the beach. And hoteliers will listen to that. It's extremely interesting because we tend not to think as much about that, although we do know that obviously the natural environment is important, but we tend to focus more on the hotel infrastructure and entertainment. But you can have the most beautiful hotel. If somebody steps on the beach and they have to wade through garbage to get to the water and it's floating by them in the water, they're probably not going to come back, notwithstanding how nice the beach is. So that's a very important thing that we can use as part of our marketing and as we say, engaging more with the private sector in terms of greening of their businesses in quotation.
But do you think the workers at the hotels are actually getting that consciousness in terms of, all right, well, this is affecting the hotel, but when I get home, am I practicing these same things at home? And that is one of the reasons why we're having this conversation, because while it is that the business entity might be more eco-friendly, we have the standards, are the workers there taking knowledge home? Whether it is they're just taking it home and practicing, or are they actually sharing this in? And I think that is one of the triggers that I want to see, where it's not just at the hotel that's taking place. It's also taking place when you go home, in school, etc. So it's really for us to have types of conversations a bit more spread. Or viewers are actually saying in the chat, a lot more public education is needed. And I think it's also for each of us, all these persons that are in the chat, let us have conversations with our friends or families, even people you buck up on the street. Like I've heard, other friends tell me, oh, they saw somebody throw, whether it is a box of food or a drink outside of a car, a moving car. And, I remember a friend of mine saying she actually drove down somebody, and I was like, wow, great. I personally would not be doing that in this day and age. I'm sorry. I will go and pick up the bottle once it's out, but yeah, I fear for my life sometimes. But even so, it still has to be with us talking to them, whether it's patois, Creole, whatever language it is. Talk to persons where they are, meet them where they are so that they can understand. Other comments within the group, Vincent, you spoke about, and I believe Mr. Jones, you spoke about the corporate social responsibility, within entities. And Vincent, you spoke more so about stakeholder engagement. That too is very important. As consumers, are we supporting the entities that have, whether it is the sustainable business strategies or the corporate social responsibility initiatives? And that is a conversation that I also want to push. Make sure you're supporting these entities. The millennials and Gen Z, they're very concerned about corporate social responsibility and giving back. We'll hear from our youth leaders later today at 1, where we're going to be talking to them about the work that they're doing, their fairs, and what is happening in their space, and what their hopes and dreams for their future, as it relates to the environment. But there's so much more that we can do. And again, another comment in the group, their decision making as it relates to what entities they support, businesses they support, it's very tagged to the business core, the mandate of the business as well. It's not just profit. Are we giving back to communities? Are we cleaning up? Are we making sure that we are doing more for the environment, and educating as well? If it is that your product has a long useful life, then what happens to the product at the end of its useful life? These are some of the conversations that we can have as well. All right, so let us talk more about just can we strike a balance between economic development and environmental preservation? We've spoken a lot about putting profits ahead of environment, and I believe that's traditional business, old school type of business. I think nowadays you see a lot more entities doing more in their space, giving back, and especially through COVID, we've seen a lot of entities actually give back. But is there any way that we can strike a balance between economic development and environmental preservation? Vincent, I'm going to start with you this time.
Let me, if I could just jump in to say that it really is not about environmental preservation. It is environmental conservation, and conservation means wise use. And that's a big difference. I just wanted to put that in before Vincent came in.
Well, it's interesting. I had
okay, no problem.
I had another term. I said I would have preferred to use the term environmental management rather than preservation. Eleanor uses conservation, but management suggests less of a conflict and more of a symbiosis. And
right, exactly.
I think there's definitely a possibility, and it's happening, as I've tried to highlight. But more is needed, which is one of the reasons why I have a job. If we were doing everything well and we didn't need anybody to keep provoking, then perhaps people like myself and my colleague Lorna, who I see is on the call as well, may not have jobs.
But, and we would not have a business either.
We wouldn't need you either. But I think that through increased investments and policies and actions that harness alternatives and protect nature, as well as being carbon neutral, which was mentioned by somebody in one of the chats, I think we can implement sustainable consumption and production, as well as introduce green jobs in a greener, more inclusive and sustainable economy. And we've been talking about some of those opportunities already in the private sector as well as in government. I think there is a lot that is currently ongoing. The narrative, and I'm very happy that Eleanor has been emphasizing this throughout the discussion on the linkages between environmental health and development more generally. The traditional issues that we would have thought of in terms of environmental health, such as water conservation, composting, planting trees, reusing, recycling, collecting rainwater, alternative uses of products and repurposing, turning off lights, unplugging appliances and laptops when not in use, carpooling, all of these things, I think are part of an approach that we can take to make the for a more sustainable future. And these are things which, in addition to education at all levels, we can certainly promote as part of our environmental awareness. I think it's more than just at the level of government where you hear these broad messages about the importance of our forests and our oceans and things. I think, as you perhaps have been mentioning as well throughout, that we need to bring it down to the level of what we as individuals can do in our own right in order to improve sustainability and behave responsible from an environmental perspective. Over.
Okay. We are actually almost at the end of the hour. I am so surprised this went so fast. This 1 hour went so fast. We have one more poll that we want to bring up before we ask our last question and then jump into take a few more questions from our audience. There is a second poll. It should be up now. We want to know, which session are you most interested in? We have 6 sessions, not including obviously the welcome and the wrap-up session at the end. So let us know which session you're most interested in participating in. And then actually, while that is going, Mrs. Jones, let me ask you pretty much the final question for today, before we move on. We're now entering arguably the last decade for real environmental change and bold climate action. What do you think a sustainable future for the Caribbean would entail? And this is, let's look at the positive. What do we want to see? What's your vision?
Okay, it's a case of what the future holds. First of all, we haven't talked much about engaging with the youth. And I think the next section might be youth in action.
Yeah.
I think it's very important for us to bring the youth and to engage them. I remember many years ago, we used to say, you work with schools and you get children involved, they go home and they embarrass their parents into action. I think there's still a bit of that. So we have children, but working with children in schools is important, but that by itself is not going to we need to come up the chain with the youth and have youth really, because young professionals especially are very keen. They have a good sense of where we need to go. And I think we need to focus a lot on that. I would say in the region, handling all of the issues that we're talking about, and just to leave the 2 main takeaways that I would like everybody to more or less think about is the whole issue of environmental health, and Vincent has elaborated on that very well. And as I've said before, engaging and incorporating risk considerations into our decision making, both at the government, the policy level, and at the private sector level, the business level.
Yeah. And surprisingly, Vincent, before you jump in, the poll results pretty much say that most of our viewers want to see what's happening in economic growth with sustainable development and what's the next one? Planning for an uncertain future. Those are the 2 sessions that are battling it out for number 1. So I'm really happy that persons are interested in the fact that they understand, economic growth and sustainable development kind of need to work together. So they're looking forward to that session. Vincent, what's your take on, what's your final word? What's your vision for the Caribbean region?
Well, thanks, and I'm happy to see the poll results as well, because COVID-19, which we haven't mentioned too much, surprisingly, it has underscored the close connection between people, nature, and climate. And this is a message that UNEP is spreading. And in order to reduce the likelihood of future pandemics, we must act now to halt the rapid environmental decline and restore the precious relationship between nature and people. So when we talk about nature-based solutions, we're talking about solutions that protect the lives and livelihoods of people. And these offer endless benefits to the environment and the economy, as was just pointed out. These could include, of course, anything from, if you want to think of alternative types of wastewater treatment, using ponds in cities so that you're including a natural environment as well as infrastructure, so people can enjoy as well as have a functional purpose. Cooling of buildings, for example, by siting them to reduce exposure to sunlight and reduce the cost of heating. There are other approaches such as reducing our reliance on imported fossil fuels and continue our movement towards renewables and reduce our reliance on imported food. Can we feed ourselves more? Also, expertise. Do we need to import expertise in order to apply appropriate technology? We have people like Environmental Solutions that have a lot of expertise in our region, but we tend to think that we need to look outside for technology. And ultimately, what I'm promoting is homegrown solutions. Solutions that are appropriate to our region, developed in our region, and serve the people of our region. So that's what I would see as part of a sustainable future for the Caribbean.
Okay, beautiful.
Over.
Thanks for that. We actually have quite a few questions in our Q&A section. Ashley, back first. All right, let's look at this one, which is actually quite interesting. The transport sector is a major source of air pollution. How can we practically address this, notwithstanding attempts to push electric mobility? And this is from Ruth. Mrs. Jones, you want to tackle that one?
It's a difficult one because we're talking about how we manage all of the vehicles on the road. We have talked about alternating, what is it called, business time, work schedules, varying work schedules. That has proved difficult because particularly for people who have to get children to school. But if you see when school is out, the number of vehicles on the road considerably reduced. So I think we have to look at the whole a policy. I don't know. It's a difficult one because so many privately owned vehicles, and when you look at the number of vehicles on the road, you look at the number of vehicles on the wharf waiting to come onto the road, it really is very frightening because the roads themselves can't handle. The carrying capacity is low. So you'll be pushing electric mobility, which I think is a very good thing. But I don't know. I don't have an answer. But I would like to see some move, because we talked also about keeping vehicles properly tuned up, properly serviced, so that exhausts are not as deleterious. But then, we don't put those things in place. So it's something that needs good consideration. The government earns a lot of duty from imported vehicles, which is another thing. So, we just, the balance is difficult to come by. I don't have an answer, but I think it's something that needs some attention.
Okay, Vincent, any insight?
I think it is a very difficult, very difficult issue to deal with. I think you've given me the opportunity to mention that last week we issued a publication on the impact of used vehicles on third world countries, the dumping of vehicles into places like Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. And they're substandard vehicles which would not pass inspection in more developed countries of Europe, particularly in maybe parts of Asia. And they're coming into our regions. And this is, of course, we know this is ongoing, but the challenge is, as we all know, that these cheap vehicles are what keeps the population happy. They can afford a vehicle. And therefore, if we said we're not going to import these used vehicles, what is the impact on the population that needs a vehicle for their livelihood? There are case studies where persons have moved out of poverty just by being able to afford a second-hand vehicle that can take their goods to market, and so on. So it's a very, very difficult situation, and it requires a lot of policy. Even electric mobility requires policies, as you heard from Eleanor, the duties on vehicles is a concern because, if you stop importing vehicles and if you start importing vehicles that don't have any internal combustion engines, are you going to be able to get the same revenue from electric vehicles, etc.? So there's many factors involved in it. It's a tough one. It's really tough.
Okay. All right. All right. So one last poll. We're going to do one last poll before we wrap up. Let's run through what is on the agenda for the rest of the week. So at 1 o'clock today, we're going to have Youth in Action. It's going to be hosted by Natasha Parchment Clark. The poll should be up now, so if you could please participate. And then on Tuesday at 11 a.m., we have Climate Change or New Reality. And that one, actually, I'm looking forward to that as well. Just the title alone, Climate Change or New Reality, it says a lot. Wednesday at 11 a.m., we have Financing for a Sustainable Future. Wednesday at 1 p.m., we have Achieving Economic Growth with Sustainable Development. Then on Thursday, Planning for an Uncertain Future. That is at 11 a.m. And Friday at 11 a.m., we're going to have Waste Management Strategies in the Caribbean. Just to note, the session, Achieving Economic Growth with Sustainable Development at 1 p.m. on Wednesday, that's going to be hosted by Kalila Reynolds. So we're definitely looking forward to that. If you need more information on the sessions, you can check out www.liveecho.com/CEW2020. All right. So thank you all for being here. Last poll, I think we have the results up. Majority are actually from the Caribbean. So we're talking to you and I'm glad to see you participating. I am actually happy that we have some people from other regions, North America, South America, Central America, Europe as well. Thank you for being here. So at 1 o'clock, we'll be talking to our youth. We mentioned earlier that we need to hear their voices. We need to get them involved. So 1 o'clock, we'll be talking to them and we'll be hearing about what they want to see. And actually, I'm very excited to hear from them as well because they are so passionate. We spoke with them earlier from last week or so, and they're really passionate about the work that they're doing and what they want us as adults to do. We have some changes that we need to make in order to have a future for them, ensure that there's a future for them. So thank you, Vincent, for being here. Mrs. Jones, thank you for being here as well. And our audience, see you at 1 o'clock. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all very much. It was a pleasure sharing.
It was excellent discussion. Nice to see you all. Take care.
Yes. Okay. Bye, Vincent.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.